All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Monday, May 9th of 2022. Thanks for tuning into the stream here today, or, of course, watching or listening to this show on YouTube or the podcast of this show, podcast version of this show. Got a lot of different avenues now to watch and listen to Office Hours here. If this is your first time watching DFS Office Hours, this is a live or streamed live open Q&A style show where I answer questions from the SaberSim community about SaberSim, about building a DFS process, whatever really you guys want to talk about. The questions come in via email. You can email us, support@sabersim.com. We get questions that are coming in live through YouTube chat on the show. And I answer questions from our Slack community in the Office Hours channel in Slack. There's a link to join the Slack community in the description of every past show on both YouTube and on Spotify. And you can join the Slack community there, ask your questions in Slack. That's probably the best way to ask your questions. I answer those questions first. Make sure to subscribe to this channel or subscribe to the podcast, regardless of how you're watching, so you can get notifications when we go live and check out the live versions of these shows. And let's go ahead and get started and jump in here. We've got a handful of questions here today. I've noticed recently a lot of the questions we've been getting on the show kind of have a general theme, which is kind of nice. A nice little, I don't know. Each question kind of relates to each other. So today, a lot of questions, or at least a handful of questions about knowing if your process is profitable, which is always a difficult question to answer in DFS in particular, but also how to study lineups from the pros, which is an interesting idea, something interesting to dive into here. We'll also talk a little bit about NBA playoff strategy. And let's see, I know I had another question in here as well. There was a question about, we'll do a demo of the entry editor to make sure that everybody has a good understanding here of how to use the entry editor to get your lineups out of SaberSim and into your contest. So anyway, let's go ahead and just get started here. Let me get a second here to pull up the app. And let's do the new view here so you guys can clearly see what I've got going on screen. So let's get the first question pulled up here. And let's start with this. This was from Andrew. And he said, how would you go about studying winning players? Take Giant Squid, for example. And this is an interesting question. This is something that you will hear commonly talked about around the industry, that this is a good thing to do, right? Study winning lineups here and learn how to build better lineups. And I think there can be a value here. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways I've done this in the past, some of the ways I will still study other lineups a little bit here, even now. And then also a couple things to be aware of or to be careful of here. I will say this. So I think there are a few mistakes that I see people make when they go about studying lineups from winning players. And one of them is I guess it's a couple here. One of them is to go and look at what lineups, potentially a winning player made here, and to try to determine some kind of heuristics from them, and then write that into a rule into your lineups. And it is difficult, I think, at times, if you see a pattern in a lineup, right, to know whether or not that was intentional, and to actually know what the purpose of that decision from that player was. For example, you may be studying a baseball slate. I guess we'll just use baseball since it's baseball season, right? And see that a player that you were studying maybe had no 8 or 9 hole hitters in their lineup set for that night, right? Now, that would be a general statement, a general description about that player's set, right? Now, what does that tell you necessarily? Does that give you something meaningful to work on? Was that pure luck? Was there intention behind that? It's a difficult question to answer. And I think often I get questions on this show where people will say, hey, I was looking at what Osimo did or what Giant Squid did on this particular slate, and now I am restricting my lineup pool in this way or restricting my lineups in that way. And I think that can be a little bit of dangerous, because it is very easy for people to read patterns into things that are not patterns. And also when you're trying to judge somebody else's process, assume that you understand, assume that your intuitive sense of why somebody made a decision is the right answer. Because ultimately, all we can do is review lineups from past slates that we will never play again. And while we will have tonight's a 9-game slate, you can look at past 9-game slates and see what players did. But slates in their own way are unicorns. And the lessons learned from studying a past player's lineups on one slate can be misleading potentially if you try to extrapolate that to another slate. What I would recommend doing, I think some of the best, I guess before we go on, I think a good analogy for this is, if you were sitting down and trying to learn math, right? Looking at the answers of the person in the class who got a 100% will only take you so far, right? That without knowing how they worked through those problems and figured out what the right answers were at, knowing just what the right answers are, it only gets you so far. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say on this before I actually go through and talk about what I actually do like to do here when I'm studying other players here is to remember another trap I see people fall into is that studying what the top lineup did on any given night, or what even the top player among a list of players on a given slate did, can be dangerous, right? There is a lot of random variance of whatever that top lineup ends up being on a given night. There are nights where I think a better lineup is more likely to win. Maybe if we had a night where on a 9-game slate there was a team that scored 12 runs and maybe another scheme that scored 10, I think you're going to see a prettier, better correlated lineup at the top. On a night where scoring is low, you're likely to see just a relatively unstacked, uncorrelated lineup up at the top. That doesn't make that a good lineup, right? That probably means that the game was less beatable that night, especially against the rake, right? Correlation is a tool that helps us build better lineups over the long term. And we are kind of shooting for slates where that strategy works out. But if you went and studied, if you went and studied the top lineup on every single slate, or the optimal lineup on every single slate or something like that, you may find that the conclusions you're drawing from that actually aren't helping you become a winning player. But let's talk about a few things that I think can actually be useful here when you're doing this. So first of all, from a tooling standpoint, I do think RotoGrinders has a pretty decent tool for this. We'll go over there. They have a results DB tool that has kind of I think it's a partnership now with Fantasy Labs. We've talked about this. First of all, I should mention here at SaberSim about doing something similar like this in the future, building some kind of results database. We have this information just like RotoGrinders does, but I think in the meantime, this is a pretty decent tool. I know FC has something similar, so really kind of whatever you want to use here, but I do think this is a nice free tool to do some analysis here for. So yesterday's 7-game Sunday main slate here, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to let's do the relay throw here. And I think this is a good opportunity first for me to mention that you should study a contest that is hopefully the exact contest that you want to get better at. It looks like that. It looks like RG has like 7 different contests here. So a pretty decent spread here. So you should study a contest that you actually want to play and get better at. Actually, in that case, let's use a 4-seamer because that's something that is actually a little bit more in my wheelhouse. That's something I'm playing a little bit more frequently, right? Remember that, especially the best players in DFS are going to vary their strategy and play to the contest that you're studying, right? So if you try to study the 150 max flagship GPP and apply something you've learned there for your single entry contest, right? I think that's a little bit dangerous. So study the right contest, right? Real quickly, I saw this question from Vinny come in. He said, what if you don't have RotoGrinders? I don't believe you need to. This is free, as I understand it. I don't believe you even need to have an account. So yeah, no, shouldn't be any problem there. But anyway, so study the right contest, right? Study a contest that makes sense for what you are trying to actually play and get better at. And have a purpose, I think, is a really good point here, right? I think if you go in and just say, I just want to see what sharp players did, I think that's going to lead you down the path of reading patterns where there aren't any, coming away with heuristics that aren't that useful on other slates or things like that. So have a purpose. 2 of my favorite purposes here for studying lineups from other players studying lineups from other players is typically to see how they handled a specific situation or see what kind of lineup constructions these players are using. So, we'll take Giant Squid, for example. So, one thing that I've done here a little bit in the past when I'm looking at Julian's lineups is I'm interested in the constructions that he's using, right? And especially I did this a little bit in football season just to see. I think I actually had a question this past football season about game stacks and how big the stacks can get. And I actually went in and looked at what Squid was doing on his larger field GPPs and found out that, he was pretty comfortable in particular for football, getting up to like even QB +3, QB +3 with a 1 run back, QB +3 with 2 run backs, right? These really pretty heavily correlated big game stacks. And that was a specific question I had that I wanted to see how he was tackling that particular lineup construction question. And I think having that approach can be helpful, right? If I had gone in, without that question, that specific goal, I think it'd be a little bit harder to get something useful out of this. I also think you can do it to look at exposures, right? And one thing, let's see what Squid did here. So an interesting point of last night's slate, I think in particular, was this Garrett Cole situation. By far the highest, or yesterday's slate, not last night's slate, by far the highest projected pitcher. Ownership projection, I think, was somewhere between 50 and 60% on most sites. And I think it was an interesting leverage spot, but also Cole was the highest overall projected pitcher on the slate by a lot, well over projected than Manoah, who I think was the next up. And I think coming in and saying, I want to see what Squid did with this particular situation is interesting, right? He faded Garrett Cole. And I imagine probably played some Rangers stacks as well to leverage directly off of that, at least a little bit of exposure to some of these Rangers bets. So I think studying the exposures here can be interesting. And I think in particular with exposures, one thing I like to do is looking at how maybe a few different players tackled different situations. So we'll just pull up a couple guys here that I was looking at earlier here. Nerdy Tenor wasn't in this one. Maybe just a few names here, right? And seeing how different players tackle different situations, I think can be interesting as well. Just as a way, of checking yourself, right? What was your stance? What was your edge that you took on that particular slate? And comparing it to what other sharp players might have done, I think can be an interesting way, especially to get familiar of, finding leverage opportunities, finding opportunities to exploit the field, different things like that. Keep in mind too that, a lot of times there aren't necessarily right answers to these, or the right answer isn't always necessarily the thing that paid out. If you go ahead and study Giant Squid's lineups over a period of time, you will find that he plays in a really aggressive exploitative strategy. If you compare him to other players that play a little bit more of a balanced strategy, you will see a big difference there, right? We can even kind of see it already here right off the bat, just between these three names. That obviously is a profitable strategy for Giant Squid. That may or may not be the strategy that you want to take in your particular lineups that you construct here. So anyway, to sum up here, I guess kind of a few takeaways. I think this can be valuable. I would say have a purpose, have a goal, have a question, have a hypothesis, something that you want to actually get out of it, an answer to a question that you have. I would say look at a few different names. And I would say study a contest that resembles the contest that you actually are trying to get better at. That one is really undervalued. I think there's a lot of times where people just go in and they just look at the flagship GPP and see what people did without realizing that is, a very top-heavy, sharp, difficult contest to beat, and may not mimic how you should attack the $4 or a single entry or the quarter jukebox or the mini max or something like that, right? And also, I would say the last thing to remember there is I would be very careful about taking the approach of studying the top winning lineup or studying what the winningest top player did that particular night. Pick a few names and study what they do over the course of a period of time, and you can go backwards in time and look at this too. But I think it can be interesting. I think it can be a good way to, especially if there was a particular strategic decision on a given slate that you're curious what others did. I think this can be a good idea to help build a little bit of that intuition of how you want to tackle situations like that more quickly than just playing the slates yourself and seeing how the results worked out. But I always find stuff like this fascinating too. The discrepancies, the ownership decisions, where different players go with their lineups in different situations like these. So, but good question, good place to start. And let's keep it rolling here and answer a couple of these other questions that are, I think, kind of similar flavors here. So this one was from Mr. T. And he said, how do you know if you're on the right track with your DFS routine on SaberSim? I understand it's likely you will lose more than you win, but how do you know just to stick with your process and be patient? I feel like I lose overall most nights, and when I win, it's a small improvement on what I had put in for that night, so my pot is slowly dwindling. Just for info, I tend to play MLB, NBA, and NHL in the 5 cent, 150 maxing, 150 in each. Thanks. Okay, so good question. So this is a tricky question to answer, legitimately. How do I know if my process is profitable is a hard question to answer in DFS because the variance is so high that it can take a really long time to realize your edge. I've demonstrated this on stream before by doing, very basic simulations of profitable players. And, even over the course of an entire baseball season, it's very easy for a player that would be long-term profitable to even have an unprofitable season, right? That can happen. So it's difficult by pure profit and loss to determine if you are playing in a way that is profitable. I think there's a couple tools that can help. The first is to use something like Roto Tracker and to check your top 1% equity in contests, right? So Roto Tracker has a tool that allows you to do this. And basically what this does is it allows you, instead of looking at pure ROI, instead of looking at pure profit and loss, you compare how often you put lineups in the top 1% of a contest or really any percentile bucket and compare that to what your expectation would be, right? The average expectation would be that you would put 1% of your lineups in the top 1% of your contests over the long term, right? That would be a perfectly average player. If you play 100 lineups, right, in theory, one of them would be in the top 1%, played out over a very long term, right? And because that bucket is bigger than binking the contest, right, it's a little less volatile, you can determine, are you outpacing your fair share of lineups in the top half of a contest? And I think that can be a very rough, decent calculation to determine if you are playing profitably over the long term. Another way of doing this, and I think why this relates to the previous question, is that I think it can be, I think you can study some other players to help make sure you're on the right track, especially when you have specific questions, right? If you took a stand on Garrett Cole yesterday and got burned, right, probably didn't have a very good day. I think it would be somewhat encouraging to see, that somebody like Giant Squid did a similar thing that you did, right? If you had switched something up and decided that you were going to start playing uncorrelated, unstacked lineups, or a lot of 2-2-2-2 stacks, you could check that against probably virtually any sharp player and maybe get corrected into seeing that maybe you should be stacking your lineups, right? Even down to particular, stacks over or under the field. I think studying sharp players can be a useful tool to answer some of those types of questions. Otherwise, it's tough. And I think one of the hardest things to do is to enter a new sport and to discover quickly whether or not you are playing profitably or not, right? When you don't have that data set, you also may not have that intuitive sense of what winning lineups look like for that kind of sport, right? It can be tough to determine if you're profitable quickly, which is why I think proper bankroll management and contest selection principles are important to be successful. On that note, okay, so I'm thinking on a contest selection standpoint, that 150 max 5 cent contest on FanDuel is a good contest by our metrics, right? It typically has a good number of effective entrants for FanDuel. It has like 200,000 lineups in it and 150 max, right? It's over 1,000 effective entrants. It's ultra low stakes. So there are a lot of sharp players that don't even have access to that contest. But I think it can be, I think it is a really good contest to practice the process of 150 maxing. I don't know if it is always the best bankroll builder out there for. I don't know if there's a better alternative on FanDuel either, though. Let me go look. What I'm saying is that contest is so big and it pays out very little to first that I think it can be difficult to actually realize your edge in this contest, right? You are going to play it for a very, very long time before you ever really get an opportunity to realize your edge. And when you take this contest down, you're only making, like, this is only what, 5% of the prize pool here. So it's not very, you're not getting very rewarded for beating out 119,000 lineups. I might recommend, if you were playing on FanDuel and trying to just play, between $5 or $10 a slate, if you want the experience of 150 maxing, I think that's a fine contest to enter. If you are interested in building your role the most quickly, keeping in mind that it is tough to build up from that point, you may be better off playing contests that, even though your swings on a given night are going to be a little bit higher, I think you have a little bit of a better opportunity to actually build up a roll a little bit quicker with something like the $1 single entry, the 3 max, maybe the $2 single entry, and then maybe playing 20 or 30 or 40 lineups into this contest just to keep a few extra lineups in play. I know that based on our contest selection recommendations that this contest does grade out very well. I don't think this contest is ever going to kill you. I just think I think it can be a hard contest to actually sustainably build up a bankroll in, even though it's soft, just because you have to beat out a lot of other entries in this contest. Your raw probability of winning this is low, and when you do, you're only making 5% of the total prize pool. It's just, if you think about what actually has to happen for a contest to take first in this, versus the prize that you get out of it, I think it's tough. So I might recommend, if you're playing that level of stakes on a given night, you might be better off playing some of these single entries, getting familiar with what a good lineup construction looks like for these kinds of contests, and starting there. I also think, even though this contest does grade out pretty well, stuff like these is still going to be much softer. So, to summarize there, I think studying your top 1% equity in your contest is a good way to determine if you are profitable. I think studying and comparing what other top players are doing with their lineups can be another way to make sure you're on the right track. And I would probably, if you had $5 to $10 to play on a given slate, I would probably play some of the lower dollar single entries first and get your feet wet there. If you're playing, honestly, now I'm thinking about it, if you're playing those contests, buying a Roto Tracker subscription and actually, tracking your top 1% equity is probably not a good investment until you grow your bankroll a little bit more and have a little bit more money available to play and to spend in DFS. So I think you'd be better off, sticking to those contests, studying what other sharp players are doing, and going from there. So, but good question. And then, okay, so similar question here from JTR. And this question says, pretty new, and I'm just testing approaches in the DK quarter and dime 20 max contests. I've been pretty much breaking even for a few weeks now. I'm unsure on which nights are actually most encouraging. Is it the ones where my results are clustered towards the top half, or do I actually want a more normal distribution of winners, mid-tier finishers, and lineups that completely fail, which would suggest I'm doing a good job of playing diverse lineups? Well, this is going to depend a little bit on what your risk tolerance looks like. So when you build lineups with SaberSim, right? And so you're building for a 20 max 10 to 50K, right? Something for the quarter jukebox. You are going to end up with, I would say, a pool of 20 lineups that, for that size contest, basically tries to attempt maximizing EV and diversification, right? You were trying to play like the SaberSim will lead you down the path of playing a generally diversified lineup that maximizes playing making the best positive EV decisions as possible, right? So at a baseline, that this question is kind of being answered a bit for you by the tools itself. Now, different people are going to have a different personal risk tolerance or aversion that SaberSim can't answer for everybody, right? For example, on tonight's slate, right, we are, I would say, at least at the moment, pretty heavily concentrated in playing Urias and Rodon, and then also Dodgers, and it looks like Giants stacks alongside that, right? You are probably going to end up with a portfolio of lineups here that I would say is generally pretty concentrated, at least at the moment, if you use default settings and played like this, right? For some people, this might not be diversified enough, right? It might be frustrating if the optimal pitchers are Urias and Rodon, and the best two stacks are the Dodgers and Giants, and you still don't take something down, right? Some people might want to diversify even more here. For others, I think this might be too much risk already, right? Even 100% exposure to any player in 20 lineups on a baseball slate might be a personal risk tolerance question. I think 20 lineups in particular is interesting. When I'm playing 150, for example, I really want that to be pretty diversified. I would expect, no matter what my total plus or minus was at the end of the night, that if I looked at the contest, I was kind of an even spread across the entire contest of my 150. I like to play a very diversified strategy. In 20 lineups, it does get a little bit harder because you have to make some stands. You have to make some decisions. 10%, even 20% of your lineups in a 20 max is only 4 lineups. And it doesn't end up feeling like very much when you're trying to get leverage over or under the field on particular players. I would say in general, obviously you want to win, right? Winning is great. I would say in general, if you are playing multi-entry GPPs 20 max and above, you'd probably want to see a general spread of your lineups. But I think the best way to answer this question is really, what do you want to see? Would it be more frustrating for you to completely brick a slate, or to feel like you were right about your strategic decisions to make on that slate and didn't give yourself enough shots on goal to actually do anything with it, right? Those are kind of the two evils that can come from either side, right? If you play a risky strategy and play with generally condensed exposures and really take some shots, you are going to brick slates. You're going to brick a lot of slates, but you are going to maximize your shots on goal when you are right with those stands. And I think SaberSim tries with the default settings to kind of strike a balance here between these two, right? So we're pretty concentrated on our pitchers. We're a little concentrated on these batters overall, but we have some diversity of the stacks in general, right? We've kind of concentrated on the pitchers. We're diversified on the stacks. So it's going to depend a lot on your own personal risk tolerance of what is your expectation of an average night, I guess, is actually a good way of looking at it. If you have any expectation that you're going to win back some of your entry fees on a given slate, especially for baseball, you probably want to play pretty diversified. If you have an expectation that you have a significantly positive ROI night when you are right, you should probably be a little bit more leaning to the side of condensing your exposures onto the plays that you think are the best positive EV decisions on that particular slate. So, but good question. I think the other thing to note too is, if you're breaking even over a few weeks, you're beating the rake, probably off to a decent start. Breaking even in DFS is never actually breaking even. You are beating like a 16% rake, especially down at the low stakes. So you're probably on the right track. But and I guess the last note on this, when you're thinking about what nights are most encouraging, I think that is an easy way to get trapped as well into thinking, the first night where you take something down, maybe you take down the quarter, right? Into thinking that was the night that you figured it all out, that was the night where you used the best process. And that might just be that was the night that variance swung in your favor. So I would take a wide lens where you can study the lineups that you've played on the whole with any of the different, methods we've talked about here today. And see if you are on the right track at large, rather than focusing on what one night might be the best encouraging to your approach. So, and I've fallen into that trap as well. If you hit something, you bank the one night, you switch something up slightly. It's very easy to think that was the secret. And that might have even been a negative EV decision. You just wouldn't know. So, but good question there. Okay, interesting question from LMAC Attack here. And he said, I've been on a 3-week unprofitable streak. So evidently it's time to change up my strategy for the playoffs. Any suggestions for process for NBA? These NBA 2-game slates are tough. They are going to be much tougher than the regular season for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think one, I mentioned this over and over again here, but I really believe that one of the biggest edges in NBA DFS in classic slates is late swap. And we really don't have that edge like we do in the regular season, right? It is so impactful. The ownership opportunities you get from swapping optimally when news breaks throughout the slate is just massive. And when that is taken away, because one, I think we get news earlier, we have less games on the slate, so there's just less opportunities for it to happen, and teams have a bigger incentive to win in the playoffs. We just don't get as much of that. Second, there are less players in the pool. The winning lineups, especially in large field GPPs, are going to be a lot closer to the optimal lineup that you could have actually built for that particular slate. The number of lineups that roster basically every player is going to be higher. So you need to be more right to take something down, right? You typically don't need anything even that resembles the optimal lineup at the end of the night to win a GPP or to have a big finish in a regular season 8-game NBA slate. On a 2-game slate, you do, and it's harder. So it's it can be a lot tougher. I honestly, I think strategically there's a few things that I've been. First of all, let me say this: I am aware of that edge. That I have a little bit of a lower edge when I'm playing NBA DFS in the playoffs, and I have scaled down my action to account for that. And I think that is a really important lesson, and that is perfectly fine to just do that, right? And remember that, right? If you are not having the same success in NBA DFS in the playoffs that you were having in the regular season, right? I think it's perfectly fine and probably very sharp to scale back some of your action and know that the game might just be harder, right? Not all the games and contests and slates in the lobby, if you could calculate it out mathematically, have the same edge available, right? And I think matching your action in a slate to what your perceived edge is there is a sharp idea. But strategically, I think there's there's two ways to, help find a little bit of an edge in particular for playoff basketball DFS. One which I have favored a little bit more heavily, and that is playing in a very exploitative way with your lineups, right? So I have, during the regular season, because that late swap edge exists, I pretty much never ran a lot of my research builds, right? I wasn't really, I guess what I'm saying is I wasn't really making a big attempt to exploit ownership beyond whatever little value the ownership fade slider did on its own here during the regular season. In the playoffs, I have been very intentional about running these builds and trying to find out exactly where I feel like the field is making ownership mistakes. And I've been exploiting that really aggressively. Part of that is because I'm playing down to, I'm down at like 1% of my bankroll invested a lot of these NBA slates. I'm comfortable taking big chances. But if I see an opportunity to exploit the field because of an ownership edge, one direction or the other, I think there's a player that the field is underrating, that is going to be lower owned than he should, or a player that's over owned. I've been, taking pretty aggressive stance on these players and have been kind of comfortable here going all in or fading aggressively some of these players, right? I think this exploitative edge exists a little bit here for playoff basketball in particular, just because the actual, apart from so tonight we have a weird slate because we have 11x projected Tyus Jones, probably starting for Morant if Morant doesn't play. But most of the slates have looked pretty similar, where there are maybe a couple players that project a little bit better points per dollar, right? But there aren't a lot of truly elite plays that have been popping up on these slates, right? Pricing is pretty efficient. Players are mostly playing their starters. The best players are getting the most run. There haven't been actually a lot of situations where, there are elite plays that are deserving of being super chalky. But there are players that have become very chalky. And I think part of that is because, at the end of the day, a traditional optimizer that like most people are going to be using to build these is just going to prioritize packing up as much average points into the lineup as possible, right? So if these were the projections that everybody was using and somebody was using an optimizer to build lineups for this particular slate, they're going to get a ton of Pat Connaughton, Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson, right? All of these guys that project pretty good per dollar. But, if his average projection was 3 points lower, right? Like you can see all of these projections are super fragile. So I think when ownership gets out of control with these players, I think it's a really good opportunity to take some aggressive stands. So that has been how I've been trying to kind of get an edge playing these slates. I do think there is another opportunity here of studying the rotations, diving into the minutes projections and how teams are actually matching up and playing against each other and making adjustments to projections to capitalize on that. Particularly, situations where there's unpredictability, right? Like the Morant situation tonight. Everybody is going to do their best to project how this team is going to play if Morant doesn't play. The SaberSim simulations included, but there's a great deal of murkiness around this situation, no matter how you cut it, right? No matter how you try to figure out where usage is going to go for all of these different players on the team, right? And I think studying situations like that and even just taking an opportunity to try to just be different can be an interesting approach as well. A situation like tonight, I don't think there's any way to get off of somebody like Tyus Jones if he's 3,400 and he's starting and he's going to be projected for 30 to 35 points or something like that. But I do think it's interesting if the field ends up thinking that Tyus Jones is overwhelmingly the beneficiary of Morant out, and we've got a guy like D'Anthony Melton who is owned in 30% of lineups on a 2-game slate, that gets overlooked, right? Looking at those kinds of situations where the field might overly gravitate towards one player or another, I think is an interesting way to approach it, right? Another way to do that there is looking at some of these top players here. And I guess, honestly, I feel like I intended to talk about player rotations a little bit more here. And I gravitated more towards the exploitative edge, just because that's the way my brain works, really. But another thing that I like doing on situations here is looking at what the top end elite plays look like and seeing if there's any opportunity to get a little bit of an edge there. If there's, I think somebody like Steph tonight is a little bit interesting as a guy that will probably get a little bit lower ownership if 85% of the lineups have Tyus Jones picking up one of the guard spots, and also a lot of the other elite value plays are guards as well. I think thinking kind of through the problem of building a lineup and just trying to even outside of just looking at projections, just trying to zig where everybody else is going to zag, right, can be an interesting idea of getting an edge here. But the last note I'll make on this is, going back to what I said before, just because there are less players in the pool in that top lineup and the top lineups in the contest are going to get closer to the optimal, you're going to brick more in these slates than you are going to in the regular season. It's going to be a higher variance path towards realizing your EV in these contests. One thing I think you can do to help balance that out is to diversify. And if you are finding that you are kind of, downswinging playing these NBA slates, or getting frustrated on slates where you are not even min cashing any of your lineups or anything like that, I think diversifying can be a good way to help counteract that. I have lowered my action and I'm playing more aggressively with my exposures to try to exploit ownership. But if you want to smooth out the variance of playoff basketball DFS, I think lowering your exposure to your most exposed plays is a good way to do that. Again, the Tyus Jones situation is interesting here tonight. I think this is the optimal strategy, but you can come in here to some of these other guys and just spread out your risk, which is going to diversify your portfolio a lot and make these swings a lot more palatable. And it doesn't necessarily need to be 50% maximum exposure, but you are going to get much more diversified lineups and a much wider range of outcomes here doing something like this than you would by default. So, good question there. Okay, a handful of questions here still left in Slack. I see some questions in YouTube as well. We will get to those in a moment. I want to hit this question from Eagles here first. And he said, I'm having a lot of problems downloading lineups from the builder to DraftKings. Even if I watch the video, I'm trying to do 20 lineups. When it goes to downloads, my downloads are saying invalid date. Does that not mean I'm saving my lineups? By the way, thanks for all of your help. Okay, let's do a quick demo. I'm entered into baseball here tonight. So let's do baseball. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is reserve your entries, right? The easiest way to use SaberSim to get your lineups out of SaberSim and into your contest is to use the entry editor. And to do that, you need to reserve your entries into your contests. So let me know if Brad said, am I the only one getting static and breaking in sound? Let me know if you guys are having any issues with that. My connection looks pretty strong here, but if anybody is having sound issues, let me know. But anyway, Eagles, let me know if you are running into issues with reserving your entries, but I'm going to assume here. Oh, huh. Vinny says he hears it too. That's no good. I don't know what to do about that, to be honest. Uh-oh. Everybody's having sound issues here. Let me try to maybe do a refresh here. One sec. All right, I'm back. Let's do a quick check. Okay. I've got the right mic plugged in and everything here. Maybe we'll try to keep going. Sorry about that here, everybody. Let me know if you guys are still hearing sound issues. I'm hoping that is better. I just refreshed. Brad says it's almost like the mic was loose. That's an interesting note there. Let me make sure everything's in. I think we're good. Yeah. All right. Sounds like it's better. So we'll go ahead and pick up from where we left off here. Let me know if there's more issues, but thanks for the heads up there. Okay, let's do a quick demo of the entry editor. So Eagles, if you've got your entries file reserved already, easiest thing to do here is to just click down. Oh, I don't have my app up. Click download template file on the entry editor here, and that will immediately go to DraftKings and download your file. So you can then just drag and drop that and pull it in here. And you should be good to go. You should have your entries file loaded away, right? If you're running into issues there, it's not loading the right file, always make sure you're on the right sport, slate, site, all of that. I do think if you're on the wrong slate and don't even have entries on that slate, it'll still download like an empty file. So make sure you're on the right slate. From there, then you need some lineups, right? So it sounds like you've got that part handled on your end, right? But we've got 20 lineups here, right? So you've got your lineups finalized. You're happy with that. You go back to the entries editor and now click fill contest with lineups. These different fill methods do different things. I'm going to just use the rank one for now, which all I have is a 20 max contest here. So I'm just going to use the rank fill to fill my 20 max with my 20 lineups. I'll kind of quickly describe what each of these do here. There's a tooltip in the app and another video over here that will explain it in more detail what the fill methods do, but we'll do a very quick version of these. Both unique rank and unique random will put a unique lineup into every single entry you are playing. Random will do that randomly, right? It will play only that will put a random unique lineup into every entry you're playing. Rank will fill your contests uniquely, but in the order that they are ranked over here. So this doesn't matter because I only have one contest entered. But if we had multiple ones, it would put a unique lineup to every contest in the order that they are in this table over here. An exact match will only fill a contest if the number of entries in that contest exactly matches the number of lineups in your set. If you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, probably just use the rank fill as you're just getting familiar, or the unique random. Either of those should work. So I'm just going to use that, and then I'll click apply, and we'll see now all my exposures popped up over here, right? So now my lineups are good. Oh, man. Sound static? That's really annoying. Hang on. Let's see. Can you guys hear me now? Let's test. Yeah, it looks good on my end. Man, okay. I restarted the mic. I hope that helps. Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah, it's possible. Brad says, I wonder if it's a lag issue. It's possible there's a connection issue. My internet seems pretty stable. I normally get a notification here if I'm having a connection issue. I haven't gotten that. My options to troubleshoot this here are a little bit limited on stream here. So I am, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to keep rolling here. I don't know if it sounds better now. Maybe somebody let me know if it sounds better now. I'm going to have to like listen to the recording of this myself and see if I can figure out what's going on. I don't know. Yeah, I could try switching to another microphone as well. Can you guys hear me at all? It's good at the minute. Okay. All right, we'll keep going. Here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to push through. We got about 15 minutes here less. And 15 minutes or so left in the stream. I'm going to do my best to get to the remaining questions, and hopefully the mic stands up, and then I'll see if I can figure out what's going on off stream, at least before tomorrow. I don't know what's going on there. But I apologize for the trouble here. Anyway, we're almost done. So we've got our lineups loaded in. Last step here is to click download all entries and download and open DraftKings. That'll re-download your completed entries file, and you can just click the upload CSV button and upload, and you should be good to go. So Eagles, let me know if that helps out. It sounds like maybe what you were doing here is downloading your lineups directly from the build, which you can do. Just clicking this download button, it just is more work for you, right? You have to manually add those lineups to your entries file and go from there. So I would recommend using the entry editor. It just makes it way easier. So, okay, let's keep it going here so that we can try to get through before the mic craps out again. Vinny says, hey Jordan, how can you tell what is a great big GPP lineup compared to the nickel on FanDuel? I always seem to have a better score on the nickel than the big GPP. Yeah, so the nickel, your given lineup is much more likely to perform better in the nickel than it is in the flagship GPP, mostly because the opponents that you are playing in this contest are going to be a lot softer, right? First of all, there's a great deal of players on FanDuel that don't even have access to this contest. I can't remember exactly what FanDuel's metric is there, but players with a certain number, I know DraftKings off the top of my head, but certain number of lifetime winnings or total entry fees won't even be able to access this contest. Second, there are a lot more lineups in this contest, there are also, it takes a lot more unique people to fill it up, right? Effective entrance is the way that we typically describe that. And there are only so many sharp players in the lobby. So this contest is just going to play a lot softer in general. I think in general, I would say overall, like my general strategies I would take to approach, something like here, what's the flagship tonight? Is it, something like this contest, and the large field and the 5 cent would be very similar. I would strategically approach those contests the same. I just think it's fair to expect that your results for a given lineup is probably going to be better in the 5 cent or even the 25 cent than it is in this contest, just because of the softness of those contests. So Wesley said, I was listening to your 20 lineups. I generally only play 20 every night. Do you think I should play 150 or so I can have more diversity? Then Brad said, I want to add to Wesley's question as I typically do 20 as well. Do you think there's any benefit to building 150 lines and randomly add those, or just build 20 and run those? Okay, so I think kind of two different questions here. I don't think you necessarily need to jump to go play 150. It will help diversify you. You'll have more lineups in play, but often the 150 max contests are going to be sharper and harder to beat. Like, for example, on DraftKings in particular, the $4 100 or the $4 20 max, I think is one of the best overall contests in the lobby. I think it is the only one I'm planning on playing tonight here. This is just a contest that's generally going to play pretty soft. It generally has a lot of effective entrance. It has a pretty friendly payout structure. I think this is a really good contest to play. The mini maxes, for example, which are the softest. I'm like hawking the chat now to make sure I'm not missing a message with the microphone. The mini maxes, I think, are losing my train of thought now. I'm getting distracted here. The lowest dollar fee to max, but they are very sharp contests, right? They're going to be difficult to beat. They have a low number of effective entrants. It only takes, for example, I think, about 250 or so unique people to max this contest out, right? You're playing, along with beating a 16% rake, you are playing against a very sharp field there. So I don't think you need to jump into 150 max contests just to say you did, or to diversify, because a lot of times you will trade that diversity for just a lower theoretical ROI. With that said, if you are interested in 150 max, I think I would recommend probably jumping in at the mini maxes rather than just diving into a much tougher contest at higher stakes. And eventually it makes sense to play these contests, right? If you are playing a lot of the other great contests that are in the lobby already, at some point it's going to make sense to add in these contests and getting 150 in play. But I don't think you need to make the jump from 20 to 150 just to play 150, and in doing so end up playing a worse contest overall. On Brad's question, if you are building 20, I would not build 150 and randomly pick 20 from that 150. All that's going to do is you're going to just play lineups with a worse Saber score for no real reason. So I wouldn't take that route. I would build the number of lineups and play the top lineups that you need for your contest that you're playing. So okay, Too Short said, if you pick one or two low-owned teams to go heavy on the 20 max, do you keep the default sliders? If not, can you give an example of how to counter the ownership slider to account for the low-owned stack? Yeah, so we talked a lot about this last week as well. So what I'm assuming, if you're going in here, maybe, and you've set a stacking rule that you are in 20 lineups only going to stack, oh God, what would be the contrarian plays? Probably like the Pirates and Rockies or something like that, right? So maybe you've done something like this. Right? And then where to put your ownership fade slider. The short answer to this, oh God, now I got a notification that my connection is unstable. So I hope it sounds okay. We'll keep going. We'll keep trying here. The easiest thing to do here is to experiment with it. I would probably run a build, right, with the default slider and your stacking rule set and see what those kinds of lineups look like, right? Are you like, are those lineups additionally making ownership stands? That's putting you in a position of playing an extremely contrarian approach, right? If you are using 5 stacks, stacking against the 2 chalkiest pitchers on the slate on a 9-game slate, I think that's probably enough ownership edge. I would probably hope to see that in the remaining lineups, I was playing probably pretty chalky, or at least like, being relatively chalky. And what is the chalk tonight? Or I don't even know if you want to be necessarily chalky, but you probably want to have pretty well protected plays along with that. And you can actually kind of see we're getting there, right? We're getting some exposure to the Dodgers, which we expect to be pretty popular. Some exposure to some of these chalkier Arizona bats. I think the best way to do this is to experiment with it and see, once you've made those adjustments on step 1, where that ownership fade slider should land for you. Let's look at what it looks like here on 0. I think overall, and this is the general theme of a lot of what we talked about last week here, is I think if you are making adjustments on step 1 to exploit ownership, or even not even just step 1 in a stacking rule, whatever, if you're exploiting ownership on one step of your process, I think it makes sense on a theoretical level to turn down your ownership fade slider. But I won't be able to necessarily tell you exactly where to put it. It is going to depend a little bit on your process. If you're taking a really aggressive stand like what I have here, I personally would probably turn it down quite a bit, or maybe turn it off, depending on what these lineups look like. Because you're already super leveraged against the field. But it's going to depend on what your individual process looks like. So, Toasted Tater said AT&T can't handle all this awesomeness. It's Comcast, actually, and they've been pretty good for me. But having some trouble today. I'm wondering, maybe it was the mic. I totally unplugged and restarted the mic, and maybe it was like loose. I think Brad might have nailed it there. So hopefully that's good. But Tom says, I find sometimes unstacking works better. I'd be careful with this. It's very hard. It's very hard to pick all of the uncorrelated players that are going to go off in a given baseball game and beat a 16% rake and turn a profit over the long term, right? You have to be extremely right. And I'm not even sure if you think about if you compare the odds you'd get paid out to what is basically an 8-player parlay, or a 9. Is it a 9-player? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. An 8-player hitting parlay plus 2 pitchers. It will pay out far better than what you would get by winning even a big DFS contest, right? That is why correlation is kind of an edge in DFS, is that we get to play players that increase the likelihood of the lineup itself being successful, while the payout at the top of the contest is still the same, right? If you are going to willingly give up that uncorrelated edge, or give that correlation edge up, it makes the job of building successful lineups a lot harder. It makes it much harder to be positive EV in these contests. So even though you may experience some success sometimes, or may occasionally see a lineup taking down a GPP that is a 2-2-2-1-1 stack or something like that, it doesn't mean it's a good strategy. And I'd be very careful with that overall. Going back to how we started the stream, I think you will find that there are very few sharp players out there, probably none, that are building unstacked lineups. There's variety to stacks, right? You may even see, you may see some stacks that are, 4-2-1-1s, 4-1-1-1-1s, things like that. There's I think a good reason to play some varied stacks, but unstacking completely, I'd be careful with that. So, David says, is this a study on today's NBA games or just a general discussion on SaberSim? Yeah. So generally, this show is open Q&A about how to use the SaberSim tools, about building a DFS process, about broader DFS strategy. Generally not as much focused on attacking a given slate. We can use the slates as examples. I would be happy to, talk about how I might approach a certain situation on a slate or how I might deal with particular things. But generally, the goal here is to provide kind of evergreen content that can be useful even if somebody came back and watched this tomorrow. So NW said, a new subscriber here. Can you show how to do late swap in MLB? Yes, I can. Good question. So there are 2 late swap tools that you can use here. And it kind of depends on what you are trying to do. How I have been doing most of my late swaps this season is I have just been doing quick swaps. And what quick swap does is it is basically like the global swaps that you see on DraftKings and FanDuel, but it's way better. And what this will do is it will basically just very quickly look for all out players and swap it with the best available projected player that fits into the salary in that spot. And then when you click apply and download, it will give you a summary here that shows you what got changed and download a new entries file. You can do this to all out players. You can also do it for a specific player. So if there's a specific player that you want to swap, and even if you want to swap to a specific player, you can do a very specific player to player swap here. And this is super useful for baseball. Most of the time for me, when you get a weird lineup at the end of the night on a West Coast game where one guy that you had in your pool is now out, I'm fine slightly breaking up a stack to just swap in the best projected player left available. I think that's fine. That works pretty good. We are adding a new tool to QuickSwap in the very near future. Well, 2 new things coming to QuickSwap in the very near future. One is that the app will alert you when you should do a QuickSwap, which we're pretty excited about. So if you have a player that is out in your lineups, you will get a little notification up here that says player's out. You can click that and it'll just instantly QuickSwap. Another thing that's coming that will be very useful for baseball is the ability to swap all out players with best available on the same team, which will make it so that you can just swap in the next best player and keep your stacks intact, which we're also very excited about. So those are coming soon. But for now, I've mostly just been using QuickSwap. The alternative, especially, maybe let's say I was doing my lineups, and let's say it ends up that Trey Turner's not in the lineup, right? Like one of the best projected plays on the slate. I have him in 65% of these lineups. It really changes my lineups a lot. I may not want to just quick swap him out and keep everything else the way it was. At that point, I would use the late swap. And specifically, I would use the late swap. I'm going to delete these rules here because they don't really apply to this build. And I would turn this toggle on. The only swap lineups containing out players. And that will basically take all of my lineups and it will rebuild all of the ones that have Trey Turner from scratch, right? It'll lock in. It won't do it from scratch, actually. I don't know why I said that. It'll lock in the players into the lineup whose games have already started and rebuild the best possible lineup around those players, but only in the ones where Trey Turner is out, right? We don't need to rebuild the lineups that don't have an out player, which is why I recommend turning this toggle on. So NW said, do you upload it to DraftKings or do you have to manually switch lineups? You can just upload that file. So let me show you here again. So if we did quick swap, right, it would apply and download. We would get a summary of the changes here. And then we can just take this new entries file and go back to the entries tab and upload it. And we're good. We don't have to manually do those changes. If you do the late swap version, right? I'm just going to late swap all 20 here. It's going to take a second. It's going to rebuild. This one takes a little longer because it's actually rebuilding the lineups. It's not just swapping somebody out. So we'll give this a second. It's rebuilding to 20 lineups. Technically, this isn't a late swap because it's far before lock, but okay. Now we have our new lineups, and same deal here. In this case, we just click download new entries. That will download a new entries file, right? Totally ready to be uploaded, and we can go back and upload here. So you don't have to do these changes manually. And I hope you don't, because that would be really very painful. So, especially with more than 28 lineups or so. But All right. Wesley said, yeah, I play the $4 one, but no luck. I think my exposures suck. I was on Fantasy Crunch right now. I'm on SaberSims and don't know the proper way to run winnable lineups. Yeah, I would say, baseball in particular with how high variance the game is, right? And what I mean by that is like it is going to take longer to be rewarded by playing profitably in baseball, right? If we go and look at basketball, like let's just pick. So Giannis is projected for 54 fantasy points, right? And if we look at his ranges of outcomes, most of his outcomes are going to be around 54 fantasy points, right? 14%, 15%, 12%. There are these big floor outcomes, right? That can happen. And it sucks when it does, but it doesn't happen that often. And while you're not going to bink every night, you are probably going to generally have something around a player's mean most of the time in basketball, right? In baseball, a hitter's range of outcomes looks like this, right? Bryce Harper is our highest overall projected hitter on the slate, and 30% of the time he doesn't score any points, right? And a hitting performance of a team is correlated in a similar way. So you can play a very good set of 20 lineups on any given night and have a pretty poor performance. Now that can still happen on basketball, but I think it happens much less often. So I would be patient. I would make sure you are playing with strong bankroll management principles, right? And be patient. Brad says, I think studies of the slate would be cool. We have talked about that as a way to incorporate that into our content mix a little bit more. That is, I'm sure, as all of you guys know, a pretty crowded space. We think we're doing something a little bit unique here with office hours and some of the other content that we have planned to come out in the near future. But it is something we have talked about, doing some more slate specific type content with kind of a SaberSim angle. Okay. Ryan had asked a question in Slack, and I think this will probably be our last question of the day here. It looks like the mic has stabilized here a little bit, which is good. So he said what are the pros and cons of playing the max amount of entries Yahoo allows you to versus just playing 1% of your entries? I think Yahoo having lower rake makes it a more interesting question than if I asked this question on FanDuel or DK. Yeah, good question. I haven't played on Yahoo in a while. Let me hold on. Let me get it pulled up. I can't even remember. There it is. All right. There we go. Yeah, so I talked about this before, not exceeding 1% of the total max entries in a contest. Yahoo will basically put the actual contest max at around 3% of the total lineups in the contest, roughly. Oh, no. Seriously? I actually jinxed it. It actually got bad again. I don't understand. Man, all right. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to answer this question. Okay, Brad says it stops. I'm going to answer this question. I'm going to hope it comes out clear. If I go back and review this before I post it to YouTube, I will re-answer it again tomorrow when I have the mic situation figured out. But anyway, the point here is, so I've talked about before, I don't like to exceed 1% of the lineups in the contest because my goal is to place in the top 1%. I don't want to place so many lineups into a contest that I am essentially competing with myself, right? That there are lineups that can't have top 1% equity because other lineups have already taken them up. Now, it's unlikely ever that you're actually going to put all of your lineups into the top 1% in a given contest unless they're all super similar. But still, I don't want to invest that much equity with a lower top 1%. But question, is there an advantage more to doing this on Yahoo? I do think the fact that there's a lower rake, there's more to be gained at the top end of a contest is a good argument. I think that makes sense. lower rake, less money is getting pulled out of the pool. There's more money to be gained in your EV calculation. I think that makes some sense. Second, I think, some of this depends on how much of a perceived edge you have in the contest there is, right? If you feel like you are much better than the field, right? If you have kind of an undeniable edge over the field and are going to be long-term very profitable, then it doesn't really matter how many entries you put into the contest, right? I think for me, part of only playing 1% of your lineups in the contest is a little bit of a hedge against potentially not having as big of an edge on that particular slate or site or sport or anything like that, right? If you have I know, Ryan, you ask a lot about Yahoo. If you have a history of playing successfully on Yahoo and have a proven kind of profitable process, there's not really any issue with putting those additional lineups in there, right? Because you're not so concerned. At that point, you're just going to give yourself the opportunity to realize that edge as quickly as possible, right? You're not really concerned about the downside of just losing quicker. This is really just a personal strategy as well, right? This is just something I do to kind of limit risk a little bit. It's not to say that this is the only way to play. The last thing I will note on this here is that the payout structure matters a little bit too. If there is in a very top-heavy payout structure where there is most of the equity is up top, I think it makes sense to play fewer entries, right? Because at that point, there's not even a lot of value in top 1%ing, period. All of the equity is up top. If a contest has a flatter payout structure, I think it can make sense to play more entries into that because there's more equity even in the min cash or the 3x or the 4x or the 5x payout positions, right? As a very general rule of thumb, the Yahoo flagship, for whatever that's worth, I know it's only a 3K to first, but the flagship contest is probably going to have a top heavier payout structure in general than the lower dollar stuff. So I'd probably be more willing to play more entries into the lower dollar stuff first than I would into the higher dollar. But if you've got an edge here, and especially with how hard it can be to just get a lot of action down on baseball for Yahoo, I would say I wouldn't worry too much about sticking directly to that 1% of total lineups in the contest for Yahoo. So HC said Jordan needs a raise to get a new mic. I have a great mic. This is the Blue Yeti, and it's a good mic. I actually, it's pretty new. I only got it like 6 months ago, around Christmas time. So a little frustrating. Brad says new internet. Could be. I don't know. I'm going to have to listen to it and maybe see if I can reproduce it on my end later. Anthony says it sounds good to me. Yeah, it's been in and out here today on the stream, which is really frustrating. It's almost worse that it's in and out because then I don't really know if I'm fixing it or just getting lucky or what. So anyway, that was the last question we had here for today's stream. So thank you to everybody that tuned in and was patient with the microphone and the technical issues. Appreciate it. I will be right back here again tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, hopefully with those issues resolved. And if this was your first time watching the stream here, or just the first time back to SaberSim in a little while, we do have a free 7-day trial. Come check us out, SaberSim.com. You sign up 7 days, no strings attached. And if you've used the trial before and then later canceled and want to come back and try it again, your trial likely was reset at the start of baseball season. It definitely was reset at the start of baseball season. If you haven't used that trial since the start of baseball, you still have it. So if you've tried us before, left, came back, give us another try, free 7-day trial. Anyway, good luck tonight. Enjoy the slate. Be back tomorrow. Take care. See ya.